lesson in grade 11 science is living tissues. Under the living tissues, we are going to talk about plant tissues and animal tissues. In this video, we are going to talk about the plant tissues first. If we look about the organization levels of an organism, you know that the basic unit is going to be the cell. Cells are going to be get together and they are going to form tissues. Tissues are going to get together and they are going to form organs. For example, if we take our body, we are having different types of organs. We are having stomach, we are having liver, likewise. So these organs are going to get together and they are going to form specific systems. If we take the digestive system, it's going to be consist of different types of organs. It's going to be a collection of the stomach, the liver, likewise. So finally, an organism is going to be made out of all of these systems. Here you can see how the cells are going to get together and how they are going to form tissues. Then tissues are forming organs. Organs are going to get together and they are going to form systems. And finally, an organism is going to be made out. We will see what is a tissue. A tissue is a group of cells with a common origin which has been modified to perform a specific function of an organism. That means a tissue has a common origin of cells and they are going to be perform a specific function. Now we see what are the plant tissues. We are going to talk about the types of the plant tissues. Plant tissues are basically divided into two types, meristematic tissues and the permanent tissues. So how they are going to be grouped into these two groups? Depending on the cells, whether they are dividing or not, they are going to be grouped into meristematic tissues and permanent tissues. That means the meristematic tissues, they contain cells where they are actively dividing. On the other hand, the permanent tissues, they contain cells that they are not involved in dividing. Now let's see some features of the meristematic tissues. These tissues contain cells which are actively dividing. So they are going to contain higher number of mitochondria in those cells because they need energy for the division. So they are involved in division, the mitosis is going to be occurred, and also inside the cells the nucleus is also prominent. This meristematic tissue is again divided into three groups according to the place where they are going to be presented in the plant. Apical meristem is going to be present in the shoot apex and the root apex. Intercalary meristem present in the internodes, and the lateral meristem, as its name implies, it's going to be present laterally in the stem and in the roots. Here you can see how the shoot apex and the root apex is going to look like. So in there you can see these apical meristemic cells are going to be there. So they are actively dividing. So the height of the growth is going to be because of the reactions or the action of these apical meristemic cells. Intercalary meristems are found in grass family plants, especially the grass we have just normally in our gardens, and also the bamboo trees they have. So they are going to be present in the internodes. So the length of the internodes are going to be due to the action of these intercalary meristemic cells. Stem is going to be present laterally in the stem and the roots. I think you all know about the cambium. The cambium is going to be present between the xylem and the phloem tissue. So in the cambium, these lateral meristemic tissues are going to be present. So they are going to be involved in the increasement of the width of the stem and the width of the roots. About the permanent tissues. Permanent tissues are also again divided into two groups: simple permanent tissues, complex permanent tissues. So, what is the basis of dividing these permanent tissues into two groups? Right? So, if you take the simple permanent tissues, they are going to contain just one type of cells. On the other hand, the complex permanent tissues, they are going to contain different types of cells. So the simple permanent tissues consist of basically three types of cells: the parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. See the diagrams of the simple permanent tissue and the complex permanent tissue. Simple permanent tissues, they consist of three different types of cells. So according to their shape of the cells and according to the nature of their cell wall, we are going to group that into three groups: parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. So first we'll look about the parenchyma. If we take the parenchyma and if we look about a cross section or the longitudinal section of a part of a plant, we can see this parenchyma cells, right? So these cells, they are going to have different types of shapes. They can be oval, they can be round in shape, or polygonal or elongated, but they are isodiametric. Their cells are isodiametric. So what is the meaning of this isodiametric? We can say that their sides are going to be equally expanded, and also we can see, if we look about the inside of the cells, we can see the nucleus. So that means they are living cells. If we take the cell walls, their cell walls are very thin and they consist of cellulose, right? And if we talk about this cytoplasm, the cytoplasm is going to be a little bit dense, right? It may contain single large vacuole. The other prominent feature of this parenchyma tissue is going to be, between the cells they contain intercellular space. Parenchyma cells contains large air cavities. Those are known as arenchyma. Usually they are going to be present in a plant leaves where they are going to be on water. So they help to float the leaves on the water. For example, if you take a lotus plant, right, you know that the plant leaves are floating on the top of the water surface. So presence of arenchyma cells are going to support that function. Sometimes these parenchyma cells, they contain higher number of chlorophylls. They are known as chlorenchyma. They are involved in the photosynthesis process. Here you can see a cross section of a plant leaf. The middle part, you can see, it is known as the mesophyll. So in this mesophyll, basically they contain the parenchyma cells. You can see there are two different types of parenchyma cells: the palisade, right, the ones which are going to be a little bit elongated, and the others are going to be the spongy parenchyma. So these two types of parenchyma cells are involved in photosynthesis. Apart from the leaves, they are going to be present in the endosperm of seeds and also the cortex and pith of the plant stem, and basically in the fleshy parts of fruits. Apart from the photosynthesis function, these parenchyma cells are involved in storing food as well, right? For example, food which is going to be stored in potato tube, they are going to be stored in the parenchyma cells, and they are storing water as well. You know that the aloe leaves, they are going to store the water in these parenchyma cells, and also some are going to provide the support as well. You know, the balsam plant, it is going to, once it's going to absorb water to these parenchyma cells, they are going to give the rigidity to the plant. Collenchyma tissues also contain living cells. If we look about the shape of the cells, usually they are polygonal, right? And also some are going to be elongated. The specific feature in these cells are going to be their cell walls, especially the corners of the cell walls are going to be thickened. These collenchyma tissue basically contain in the veins of dicot leaves. If you look about the functions of this collenchyma tissue, basically they are going to give the mechanical support for the plant, and also if they are going to contain chloroplasts, they are going to do the photosynthesis process as well. Here you can see the difference between the parenchyma and the collenchyma tissues. You can see that the parenchyma, which is going to be on the bottom, right? Their shape, you can see the intercellular space very prominently. And if you look about the collenchyma cells, you can see some darkened area. So those are the areas where the corners have been thickened. Sclerenchyma tissue is made out of sclerenchyma cells. The important thing in these cells are going to be dead cells. But the parenchyma and the collenchyma, they are having living cells, but in this sclerenchyma tissue, the cells are going to be dead. And there is another specific thing. The primary and the secondary cell walls of these cells are going to be thickened by lignin. Usually we are going to say that lignification of the cell walls are going to be occurred in the sclerenchyma tissue. And also these cells are going to be tightly packed, right? And there are two types of cells in this sclerenchyma tissue, basically the fibers and the sclerites. If we talk about these fibers, these are going to be present in the xylem tissue and also in the phloem tissue. Apart from that, they are going to be found on coconut, right? They are known as coconut fibers, and in agave fibers, and also they are going to be found in coconut wool as well. On the other hand, the sclerites, they are found basically in endocarp of coconut. And also, you know that there is a very hard seed coat on coffee and dates. So there also the sclerites are going to be found. The basic function of the sclerenchyma tissue is going to be giving the mechanical support to the plant body. In this diagram, you can see the differences of the cells in these three types of tissues, the parenchyma, collenchyma, and the sclerenchyma. In the parenchyma, as I said before, right, the shape is going to be, the cells of the shapes are going to be isodiametric, and also the intercellular space is present. In the collenchyma, you can see that the corners are going to be thickened. In sclerenchyma, it contains very thick lignified walls. This is another schematic diagram of the three tissues. The cross-sectional diagram and the longitudinal diagrams are going to be shown here. In the parenchyma tissue, you can see that the nucleus is going to be prominent, and also the intercellular space is going to be prominent. In collenchyma tissue, you can see that the corners of the cell walls are going to be thickened, and in the sclerenchyma tissue, they contain a very thick cell wall. So from these specific things, you can identify whether it's going to be a parenchyma tissue, a collenchyma tissue, or a sclerenchyma tissue. Finally, we can make a summary by comparing these three types of tissues. We can use some specific features like the cell shape, the cell wall, whether it contains a cytoplasm or not, whether the nucleus is going to be prominent, whether it contains vacuoles, or whether the intercellular spaces are going to be present or not. and also the place we are going to be present in the plant, and also we can compare their functions as well. Complex permanent tissues. Tissues are made out of more than one type of cells. That means they are containing more than one cell. It can be 3 or 4. And also it's going to be divided basically into two types, the xylem tissue and the phloem tissue. Section of a plant stem, we can see how the xylem tissue and the phloem tissue is going to look like. You can see that the xylem tissue is going to be inner, right? It's going to be near to the pith, right? And the phloem is going to be in outer. In between the xylem and phloem, the cambium is going to be present. The longitudinal section of a plant stem. So here you can see how the xylem and the phloem tissue is going to be it's going to be situated. You can see that the xylem is going to be near to the pith and the phloem is going to be near to the epidermis. In between the xylem and phloem, the cambium is going to be present. We all know the transportation of water and minerals throughout the plant is going to be in this xylem tissue. So if you look about this xylem tissue, basically it consists of 4 cells. The xylem vessel, you can see vessels, they are cylindrical in shape and they are going to be, and the walls, the cross walls are going to be dissolved, so they are going to form a tube-like structure. So in that tube-like structure, the water and the minerals are going to be flown. It's going to form a passage to pass the water and mineral throughout the plant. Near xylem tracheids, they are a little bit narrower and shorter, right? And you can see the xylem fibers are also a little bit shorter and narrower. These three types of cells are going to be dead cells because the lignification is going to be occur in these three types of cells. And then you can see the xylem parenchyma in the xylem tissue. The xylem parenchyma is going to be the only living cell in the xylem tissue. So it is going to do, it's going to store the food in the xylem tissue. Phloem tissue is involved in transportation of food throughout the plant, which is known as a translocation. Phloem tissue is also consist of 4 basic types of cells: the sieve tubes, companion cells, phloem parenchyma, and phloem fibers. Sieve tubes are going to be stacked one on another, and here the cross sections of the sieve tubes are going to be incompletely dissolved. So they are going to form a sieve plate. The companion cells and the phloem parenchyma and the phloem fibers are going to be consist in there. The companion cells contain nucleus, so it's going to control all the activities in the sieve tube element. The sieve tube elements, the companion cells and phloem parenchyma are living cells, but the phloem fibers are going to be dead cells. You can see the longitudinal and the cross-sectional view of the phloem tissue. If you take the cross-sectional view, you can see that the sieve pores are very much visible. That means the sieve plate. And with that, you can see the companion cells. It consists, the nucleus is going to be there. So it is clear that the sieve plate and the companion cells are going to be very much prominent in the phloem tissue. Summary, we can conclude that the plant tissues are basically divided into two types, the meristematic tissues and the permanent tissues, depending whether the cells are going to be dividing or not. So again, if we take the meristematic tissues, we divided that into three groups, apical, lateral and intercalary, depending on their situation or where they are going to be present in the plant. If we look about the permanent tissue, we divided those two into simple and complex tissue. The simple we divide again into parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma depending on their cell shape and how their cell walls are going to look like. So you should be able to identify clearly this how this parenchyma tissues is going to be, what are their prominent features, and the collenchyma and the sclerenchyma. Then we talk about the complex permanent tissues. So they are the complex permanent tissues. They contain more than one type of cells. Under that we talk about the xylem tissue, which is important in transportation of water and minerals through the plant, and the phloem tissue, which is important in transportation of food throughout the plant. So in the next video we'll talk about the animal tissues.